In 1770, roughly 16,000 people lived in Boston. 16,000 souls crammed onto a peninsula no bigger than a few modern city blocks. They woke every morning not knowing if that day would bring bread or bullets, whether the redcoat soldier standing on their corner would let them pass, whether the ship in the harbour carried goods or another regiment of men with muskets. Within 5 years, half these people would flee. Within 10, their city would spark a revolution that changed the world forever. This is what it actually felt like to live there, to wake up, to work, to survive, to watch history unfold from your own front doorstep. If these stories help you wind down at night, a like or subscribe would mean a lot. And I'm always curious where everyone's listening from, so drop your city in the comments if you feel like it. Alright, let's get into it. So we're going back to Boston, the 1760s. And look, before we start, make sure you're settled in. Get comfortable. Adjust whatever needs adjusting. Because colonial Boston in winter, it was brutal. You're going to appreciate that warm bed of yours by the time we're done. The bells of Christchurch are ringing somewhere across the rooftops, and you're already late. You're Daniel, 17 years old, a ropemaker's apprentice on Long Wharf, and right now, you're pulling on frozen boots in a boarding house room that smells like 3 unwashed teenagers and last night's chamber pot. The year is 1765. March. Your breath fogs the air in front of your face as you fumble with the laces. No time for breakfast, but that's fine. You'll grab some beer on the way. Yes, beer for breakfast. Everyone drinks beer here, even kids. The water will kill you faster than the British ever could. Dysentery, cholera, typhoid. One bad well and half your neighbourhood's dead by Tuesday. So you drink beer or cider from morning to night. Colonial Americans drink about 3 times as much as modern Americans will someday consume, and honestly, given everything else going on, it's probably the only reasonable response. 2 other apprentices share this room with you. William is still snoring in the corner, and the smell coming off him could strip paint. Nobody's bathed in weeks, months maybe. Here's a fun fact about colonial New England. People up here might wash their whole body once a year. Once, if that. Some folks went decades without being, as they put it, wet all over at once. The thinking was that water opened up your pores and let disease in, so everyone just didn't. You get used to the smell eventually, or your nose gives up. Hard to say which. James is already gone because James is always gone before anyone else wakes up. Smart kid, James. You should be more like James. Master Webb doesn't tolerate lateness. The floorboards creak as you stand. They're so cold they feel wet against your stockinged feet. The whole building creaks, actually. Mistress Hutchins, who runs this boarding house, likes it that way. Says she knows exactly who comes and goes at what hour. Any funny business and you're out on the street. Not that you try any funny business. You're too tired for funny business. You're always too tired. The front door sticks. You have to shoulder it open, and then the cold hits you properly. Not the seeping cold of the bedroom. The real cold. The Boston Harbor cold that smells like salt and fish and tar and something else. Something you've never been able to name but which you'd recognize anywhere. The smell of a working port. The smell of ships and money and men who've crossed oceans. Long Wharf stretches out before you in the darkness. Nearly half a mile of wooden planking extending into the harbour, lined with warehouses and counting houses and the dark shapes of vessels tied up alongside. At this hour, torches burn at intervals along the wharf, casting pools of orange light that make the darkness between them seem darker. Men are already moving. Sailors and dock workers and customs officials and the 1,000 other people it takes to keep a port running. And soldiers. You see them immediately. Red coats visible even in the dim light. A patrol of 4 walking along the wharf with their muskets shouldered, their breath steaming. They've been here for a few months now, these redcoats, sent from England to keep order, they say, to enforce the new taxes, to remind Boston who's in charge. Nobody likes them. Nobody wanted them here. 2 years ago there weren't any soldiers in Boston at all, and life was simpler. Now they're everywhere, in the streets, in the taverns, outside the churches on Sunday. They take up lodging in people's houses because there's nowhere else for them to sleep, and the people who have to house them hate it. But you keep your head down. You're an apprentice. You have work to do. Politics is for men with time and money, and you have neither. The rope walk where you work is near the base of the wharf, a long, low building that stretches for over 1,000 feet. That's how rope is made, in case you're wondering. You take hemp fibers, and you twist them, and then you twist those twists together, and then you twist those twists together again, over and over until you have something strong enough to hold a ship at anchor in a storm. The building has to be that long because the rope has to be that long. A ship's cable might be 200 fathoms or more. It's hard work. That's the first thing people don't understand about rope making. They think it's just standing around twisting fibers. It's not. It's walking. Miles and miles of walking back and forth down the rope walk, keeping the twist even, keeping the tension right. Your legs ache by noon. By the end of the day they feel like they might fall off, and it's dangerous too. The tar they use to waterproof the finished rope is kept hot in great cauldrons, and if you're not careful, if you brush against one of those cauldrons, you'll have burns that take months to heal. The fibers themselves can slice your hands open if you don't wear your gloves, and the whole building is a fire hazard. All that rope, all that tar, all that dry hemp, one spark in the wrong place, and the whole rope walk goes up. It's happened before. It'll happen again. But this is your trade. This is what you do. This is how you'll spend 7 years of your life, learning everything there is to know about rope, and then maybe you'll have enough to set up your own shop. Or maybe you'll spend the rest of your days working for someone else. Hard to say. The future is a foreign country. You try not to think about it too much. Master Webb is already in the rope walk when you arrive. He's a big man, Master Webb, thick through the chest and arms from decades of this work. His hands are like leather, stained black with tar. He looks at you as you enter but doesn't say anything. That's good. That means you're not late. There are maybe a dozen men working today, which is light. In summer there might be twice that. Boston builds ships, and ships need rope, and there's always more rope needed than hands to make it. But it's March, and some of the seasonal workers have gone to find other employment, until the warm weather brings the work flooding back. You take your place at the spinner. This is where you start every morning, feeding hemp fibers into the spinning machine while your hands twist and pull and guide the material into something usable. It's repetitive work, mind-numbing really, but that's the point. In the morning, when your brain isn't quite awake yet, you don't need work that requires thinking. You need work your hands can do while your thoughts wander, and your thoughts do wander. To the soldiers on the wharf, to the talk in the taverns about taxes and rights and something called the Stamp Act that everybody's angry about, to the news that came last week about protests in New York, people burning effigies of tax collectors, crowds smashing windows, to the murmuring that maybe the same thing will happen here. You don't understand all of it. You're 17. You're an apprentice. You care about making rope and earning your keep, and maybe someday having enough money to rent your own room instead of sharing with William and his snoring. But even you can feel it. This tension in the air, this sense that something is coming, something bigger than any of them, something that's going to change everything. The hours pass, the rope grows, your arms grow tired and then grow numb and then stop complaining altogether as your body gives up on registering the discomfort. That's the secret to manual labour you've learned. Do it long enough and you stop feeling it. Your body just accepts it as normal. Around midday, a commotion outside. Voices raised. You and the other workers drift toward the door to see what's happening. On the wharf, a crowd has gathered. Maybe 50 people. Dock workers and sailors and a few well-dressed merchants too. They're surrounding something. Someone. You push forward, curious despite yourself. It's one of the soldiers. A young one, about your age, in his red coat and white breeches, standing very still while a man twice his size shouts in his face. You can't hear all the words, but you catch enough. Something about the man's sister. Something about inappropriate advances. Something about how if this lobsterback thinks he can behave this way in Boston, he has another thing coming. The soldier says nothing, just stands there. His hands are at his sides, but you can see them trembling slightly. He's scared. You can see that too. He's a kid, just like you, and he's far from home, and 50 angry colonists are screaming at him, and his patrol mates are nowhere to be seen. For a moment, you feel something like sympathy. Then you remember the way the soldiers swagger through the streets, the way they take what they want from shops and don't always pay for it. The way one of them knocked old William Garrett to the ground last week just for walking too slowly past him. The sympathy fades, but the situation doesn't escalate. Not today. A merchant steps forward, says something calming, and slowly the crowd disperses. The soldier hurries away, looking back over his shoulder, his face pale. You go back to work. The rope keeps spinning. The hours keep passing. By evening, your hands are raw and your back aches and you smell like tar and sweat. But you're done for the day. Master Webb pays you your wages in coin, a few pennies that jingle in your pocket as you walk back toward Mistress Hutchins' boarding house. The streets are busy now, the evening crowd out to drink and gossip and forget about their own long days. You pass the Green Dragon Tavern on Union Street and hear laughter spilling out into the night. For a moment you consider going in. A mug of ale would be nice, but ale costs money, and money is something you're trying to save. So you walk on through the narrow streets of Boston's North End, past houses pressed so close together you can hear arguments through the walls, past shops with their shutters closed for the night, past the stocks near the meeting house where they put people who break the Sabbath or drink too much or talk back to their betters. You've seen men stand there all day while neighbours throw rotten vegetables at them. Seen women with their tongues clamped in iron bridles for gossiping. Saw a man get his ears nailed to the wood once for counterfeiting. Nailed. Then cut off when his time was done. This city doesn't mess around. Past the shadow of the old North Church rising against the stars, it's quieter here. Away from the harbour, away from the taverns. Just the sound of your own footsteps on the cobblestones and the occasional bark of a dog. You think about the soldier again, the fear in his face. You think about the crowd, the anger that seemed to come from somewhere deep, somewhere beyond just this one incident. You think about what James said last night, about how his cousin heard that the Sons of Liberty are planning something big, something that will show the Crown that Boston won't be pushed around anymore. You don't know what any of it means. Not really. You're just a rope maker's apprentice. You wake up before dawn and work until dark and fall into bed exhausted and do it all again the next day. Politics happens somewhere above you, in rooms you'll never enter, between men who wear wigs and speak Latin and have never twisted a fibre of hemp in their lives. But you're starting to understand that it doesn't matter whether you understand it. Whatever's coming, it's coming for everyone. The merchants and the tradesmen and the apprentices and the slaves and the soldiers and the politicians. All of them. All of you. Something is building in this city. Something that hasn't got a name yet. Something that feels like the pressure before a thunderstorm. That heavy electric charge that makes the hair on your arm stand up. You reach Mistress Hutchins' house. The stairs creak as you climb them. William is already snoring. James is reading by candlelight, which is expensive, and you want to tell him to put it out, but you're too tired to argue. You pull off your shoes. You pull off your stockings. You lie down on your straw mattress and pull the thin wool blanket up to your chin and stare at the darkness where the ceiling should be. Tomorrow you'll wake up before dawn again. You'll walk to the rope walk. You'll spin hemp until your fingers bleed. You'll watch the soldiers and the crowds and the tension that never quite explodes but never quite fades either. Tomorrow you'll do what you always do, what everyone in Boston does. You'll survive. And surviving here is no small thing. 4 out of 10 children don't make it to age 6. 4 out of 10. That's not a typo. Your mother had 7 kids. 3 of them died before they could walk. You don't talk about it. Nobody talks about it. It's just how things are. Death is as common as breakfast here, which, speaking of, you still haven't had. The bells of Christchurch sound midnight somewhere in the distance. You close your eyes. Sleep comes slowly, the way it always does. Your thoughts drift like ships in the harbour, bumping against each other, finding their anchor points, settling into stillness. You think about home. You think about your mother. You think about the smell of rope and tar and salt water, which is the smell of your whole life now, which is the smell you'll probably carry to your grave. The room grows warmer, or maybe you're just getting used to the cold. The straw beneath you stops feeling so lumpy. William's snoring fades into background noise, rhythmic as waves against a hull. In the darkness, Boston sleeps. 16,000 people in their beds, in their dreams, in that quiet space between one day and the next. The soldiers sleep in their barracks. The sailors sleep in their hammocks. The merchants sleep in their feather beds. And the slaves sleep in their quarters. And somewhere, in a tavern that won't close for hours yet, men are still talking in low voices about liberty and rights, and what they're willing to do to keep them. But you don't know about any of that. You're 17 years old. You're a rope maker's apprentice. And right now, all you know is the weight of your own exhaustion, the softness of the darkness, the gentle pull of sleep drawing you down like an anchor finding the bottom of the harbour. Tomorrow will come, it always does, but for now, there's only this. 5 months later and Boston is a different city. It's August now, hot. The kind of humid, sticky August heat that makes the whole town smell worse than usual. The harbour reeks of rotting fish and low-tide mud. The streets reek of horse dung baking in the sun. The rope walk where you spend your days reeks of hot tar and sweat, and by noon you're drinking water faster than you can keep it down. But the heat isn't what's changed things. It's the Stamp Act. You've heard that phrase so many times in the last few months that it's lost all meaning. Stamp Act. Stamp Act. Every conversation in every tavern, every argument on every street corner. The Crown has decided that every piece of paper in the colonies needs a special stamp. Newspapers, legal documents, playing cards, marriage licenses. And these stamps, they cost money. Money that goes straight back to England. People are angry. Not the quiet, grumbling kind of angry that fades after a few ales. This is something else. This is the kind of angry that makes men do stupid things. You find this out on August 14th. The morning starts normal enough. You wake up with the bells, same as always. Pull on your clothes, same as always. Walk down to Long Wharf through streets that are already busy with merchants and sailors and the usual chaos of a port town waking up. The harbour is crowded with ships, their masts sticking up like a forest of bare trees against the morning sky. You count maybe 40 vessels at anchor today, which is good. More ships means more rope needed. But something feels off. You can't put your finger on it at first. Just this prickle at the back of your neck. People walking a little faster than usual. Conversation stopping when strangers pass by. That feeling you get when everyone knows something you don't. At the rope walk, Master Webb is in a foul mood. He barks orders and snaps at anyone who moves too slow, which is not like him. Usually he's gruff but fair. Today he seems wound tight as one of his own cables. Around mid-morning, James appears at your elbow. He's supposed to be working the far end of the walk, but here he is, eyes bright with something that looks like excitement. "You hear about the tree?" he asks, keeping his voice low. "What tree?" "The big elm. Down on Orange Street near the corner of Essex. Someone hung something from it last night." You don't understand what he's talking about, and your face must show it, because James grabs your arm and pulls you toward the door. "Come on. You need to see this. Webb will kill us." "Webb won't notice. Half the workers are already gone. Haven't you looked around?" You look around. He's right. The rope walk, which should have a dozen men working, has maybe 5. The others have slipped away while you weren't paying attention. So you go. You and James, walking fast through the crowded streets, past Faneuil Hall where the market sellers are doing brisk trade, past the old State House with its lion and unicorn perched on the roof like they own the place, past shops and counting houses and a group of redcoats who watch you pass with hard eyes but don't stop you. The crowd gets thicker as you get closer to Orange Street. By the time you reach the corner of Essex, you can barely push through. Must be 200 people here, maybe more, all of them staring up at the same thing. It's an elm tree, a big one, maybe 100 years old, its branches spreading wide over the street, and hanging from one of those branches, swinging gently in the hot August breeze, is a body. Your stomach drops. You've seen dead men before. Sailors pulled from the harbour, bloated and blue, a dock worker crushed by a falling crate. But this is different. This is a hanging. This is... James is laughing. "It's not real," he says, seeing your face. "Look closer." You look closer, and you see what he means. It's not a body, it's an effigy. A stuffed dummy dressed in fine clothes, with a face painted on a sack and a sign hung around its neck. The sign reads, A.O. "Andrew Oliver," James explains. "He's supposed to be the stamp distributor, the man who's going to collect all those taxes of the crown." "They hung a dummy of him?" "Someone did. Last night. Nobody knows who." James grins. "Well, somebody knows. But nobody's talking." You stare up at the effigy. Someone's added a boot to it with the initials of another hated official. Someone else hung a sign that reads, "He that takes this down is an enemy to his country." And here's the thing, nobody takes it down. Not the sheriff, who shows up and takes one look at the crowd and quietly leaves. Not the governor's men. Not anyone. The whole British Empire, the most powerful force on earth, and they can't remove a stuffed dummy from a tree because a bunch of angry colonists are standing around glaring at them. That's when you start to understand something. They need us to cooperate, and we're done cooperating. You stare up at the effigy, swaying in the breeze, and you feel something strange in your chest. Fear, maybe. But also something else. Something that feels a little like excitement, like standing at the edge of a cliff and looking down. People around you are talking, laughing, pointing up at the dummy. Someone starts a chant. No stamps. No stamps. Others take it up. The sound swells until it fills the street, bouncing off the buildings, loud enough to be heard halfway across Boston. No stamps. No stamps. You find yourself mouthing the words, not shouting them, not yet, but mouthing them, tasting them. A man pushes through the crowd, well dressed, with a good coat and a silver-headed walking stick. He stares up at the effigy with a look on his face that you can't quite read. Disgust, maybe, or fear, or both. "This is treason," he says, loud enough for people around him to hear. "You'll all hang for this." Someone laughs. Someone else throws something, a piece of rotten fruit maybe, and it splatters against the man's good coat. He stumbles backward, shocked, and the crowd closes around him for a moment before he manages to fight his way free and disappear down a side street. The laughter gets louder. The chanting gets louder. And you realize, standing there in the August heat with sweat running down your back and the sound of rebellion ringing in your ears, that something has shifted. Something has broken loose. Boston has taken a step that can't be taken back. You and James stay until noon, watching. More people arrive. The crowd swells to maybe 500, then more. A few men climb the tree and add a boot to the effigy, painted with the initials of a hated tax collector. Someone else hangs a sign that says, "He that takes this down is an enemy to his country," and nobody takes it down. Not the sheriff who shows up around midday and takes one look at the crowd and quietly leaves. Not the governor's men who are conspicuously absent. Not the redcoats who seem to have vanished from this part of town entirely. The tree stands, the effigy swings, and Boston holds its breath. By afternoon, you're back at the rope walk, pretending you never left. Master Webb knows better. He can see it in your face, probably, but he doesn't say anything. Maybe because half his workers were at that tree too. Maybe because he was thinking about going himself. The work continues. The rope spins out under your hands, yard after yard after yard. Your muscles move through the familiar motions while your mind stays back at Orange Street, replaying what you saw. The crowd, the chanting, the man with the good coat and the fear in his eyes. Is this what revolution looks like? You don't know. You're 17 years old. You make rope for a living. What do you know about revolutions? But something in you has woken up, some part that was sleeping before, and it's not going back to sleep. That night, the real trouble starts. You're back at Mistress Hutchins' boarding house, lying on your mattress and listening to William snore when you hear it, shouting, the sound of many feet on cobblestones, glass breaking somewhere in the distance. James sits up in the darkness. They're going to Oliver's house. Who is? The mob. Everyone. Come on. You should stay in bed. You know you should stay in bed. Tomorrow is a work day. Master Webb won't tolerate you showing up half dead from a night of running the streets. But James is already pulling on his boots, and the sounds outside are getting louder, and that thing in your chest, that new awake thing, won't let you lie still. So you go. The streets are chaos. Torches everywhere, casting wild shadows on the buildings. Men running in groups, some carrying clubs, some carrying axes. Women watching from doorways with their children pulled close. Dogs barking. Someone singing a song you don't recognize, something about liberty and death. You follow the noise to a building on Kilby Street, a new building still under construction. Word is that Oliver planned to use it as his stamp office. That's the rumour anyway. Whether it's true or not doesn't seem to matter anymore. The crowd is tearing it apart. You watch, stunned, as men attack the building with axes and hammers in their bare hands. Wood splinters, glass shatters. The frame groans and then gives way, collapsing in a cloud of dust while the crowd roars its approval. And then someone shouts, "To Oliver's house! To his house!" The mob surges forward. You're swept along with it, pushed and pulled by bodies you can't see, carried through streets you barely recognize in the darkness and the torchlight. James is somewhere beside you, his face lit orange by the flames, his eyes wide and wild. This is madness. This is absolute madness. And you can't stop. You don't want to stop. Oliver's house is a fine one down near Fort Hill. By the time the mob arrives, the man himself has fled. Smart of him. Because what happens next isn't pretty. They start with the windows, every pane of glass smashed. Then the door, battered in with a log that must have taken 20 men to carry. Then they're inside, and you can hear crashes and screams and laughter echoing out into the night. Furniture comes flying through broken windows. Paintings, books, fine china that shatters on the cobblestones. Someone finds Oliver's wine cellar and bottles start passing through the crowd, hand to hand, mouth to mouth. You don't go inside. Something holds you back. Some last shred of the boy who just wants to make rope and earn his keep and stay out of trouble. You stand in the street and watch, and feel your heart pounding like it's trying to escape your chest. A man stumbles out of the house wearing one of Oliver's wigs, doing an exaggerated bow while the crowd howls with laughter. Another man follows carrying a portrait, holds it up for everyone to see, then throws it on a fire that's been started in the middle of the street. The flames leap. The crowd cheers. Someone's found Oliver's wine cellar and is passing bottles around. A woman near you is wearing what looks like one of Mrs. Oliver's dresses, twirling in the firelight like she's at a ball. It's chaos. It's madness. It's also, you realise with a chill, extremely well organised. Nobody's looting the silverware. Nobody's taken anything valuable. They're destroying it, burning it, making a point. This isn't a robbery. It's a message. And somewhere in the city, church bells start ringing. Not for a fire, not for a funeral, for something new. Something that doesn't have a name yet. By dawn, it's over. The mob melts away as the first grey light creeps over the harbour. Men who were screaming for blood a few hours ago walk quietly home to their wives and children, their faces tired, their hands dirty. You make it back to Mistress Hutchins' place just as the bells ring for morning. No sleep. Your eyes burn. Your throat is raw from smoke and shouting. But you have to work. If you don't work, you don't eat. So you wash your face in cold water, pull on your work clothes, and walk down to the rope walk like nothing happened. Master Webb looks at you when you arrive, looks at the soot on your face that you didn't quite get off, looks at the redness in your eyes. He opens his mouth like he's going to say something, then he closes it again, nods toward the spinner, and you get to work. The rope doesn't care about revolutions. The rope just needs to be twisted yard after yard, same as yesterday, same as tomorrow. Your hands know what to do. Your body moves through the motions, and your mind drifts back to the night before. The shouting, the fire, the portrait curling and blackening in the flames. Is this the beginning, or is this the end of something? You don't know. You're too tired to know. You're too tired for anything except putting one foot in front of the other, twisting one strand around another, staying awake long enough to earn your pay and go home and fall into bed. But even as you work, you can feel it. The city has changed. Something cracked open last night and it's not going to close again. Outside the rope walk, Boston is quiet. Too quiet. The usual bustle of the harbour seems muted, hushed. People walking with their heads down, avoiding each other's eyes. Soldiers patrolling in pairs, their hands on their muskets. Everyone waiting. Everyone wondering what happens next. And you? You're just a rope maker's apprentice. 17 years old. Hands covered in tar, back aching from work, eyes stinging from smoke and lack of sleep. But you were there. You saw it. And something in you has changed too. You just don't know what yet. The day passes slowly. Slower than any day you can remember. Every hour feels like 3. Every yard of rope feels like a mile. By the time Master Webb dismisses you, the sun is already setting, painting the harbour in shades of red and orange that look too much like the fires from last night. You walk back to the boarding house through streets that feel different now. The same buildings, the same cobblestones, the same smell of salt and fish and tar. But everything has shifted somehow, like looking at a familiar face and suddenly seeing someone new behind the eyes. William is asleep already when you get back. James is sitting on his bed, staring at nothing, his face pale in the candlelight. They say Hutchinson's house is next, he whispers. The lieutenant governor. They say the mob is going after him tomorrow night. You don't answer. You're too tired to answer. You pull off your boots and lie down and close your eyes and try not to think about anything at all. Sleep takes you fast this time, deep and dreamless. Your body giving up the fight, surrendering to exhaustion. Tomorrow more rope. Tomorrow more work. Tomorrow maybe more chaos. But right now, there's only the darkness behind your eyes. Only the steady rhythm of William's snoring. Only the distant sound of the harbour, waves lapping against hulls, ships creaking at their moorings. Boston sleeps, or tries to sleep, waiting for whatever comes next. Andrew Oliver resigned his position as stamp distributor the day after the mob destroyed his house. Smart man. He stood on the stump of the Liberty Tree, that same elm on Orange Street, and announced to a crowd of thousands that he wanted nothing more to do with stamps or taxes or anything that might bring another visit from his neighbours in the night. The crowd cheered. Someone bought drinks for the whole street, and for a little while Boston felt like it had won something. But then November came, and the Stamp Act was supposed to go into effect, and suddenly nobody knew what would happen. Would ships refuse to sail without stamped papers? Would the courts close? Would business grind to a halt? Turns out, Boston had an answer for that too. They just ignored the whole thing. Ships sailed anyway. Courts stayed open. Newspapers printed without stamps. And the Crown, 3,000 miles away across an ocean, couldn't do a thing about it. You learned all this in pieces over weeks and months, conversations at the rope walk, gossip at the market, and eventually at the Green Dragon. The first time you actually walked through those doors was in late October, a few weeks after your 18th birthday. James dragged you in. He'd been spending more time there lately, coming back to the boarding house late at night smelling like tobacco and rum, with a look on his face like he knew secrets he couldn't share. You need to meet some people, he said. That's all he'd tell you. The tavern was on Union Street, a wooden building with a sign hanging over the door. The sign showed a dragon, painted green, looking fierce and a little ridiculous at the same time. Inside, the main room was crowded and loud and thick with pipe smoke. Men packed around rough wooden tables, drinking ale and arguing about politics and laughing at jokes you couldn't hear. Here's something about colonial taverns. They're basically the internet of the 1760s. Post office, tavern, news, tavern, courthouse, sometimes a tavern, political organising, definitely a tavern. The average colonist drinks about 3.5 gallons of alcohol a year, and most of it gets consumed in places like this. Boston alone has over 100 licensed taverns for 16,000 people. That's one tavern for every 160 residents. These people like to drink and talk and drink while talking. James led you through the crowd, nodding at people he knew, until you reached a door at the back. A big man stood beside it, arms crossed, watching everyone who passed with flat, careful eyes. "He's with me," James said. The big man looked at you. Really looked, like he was memorizing your face. Then he stepped aside. Behind the door was a staircase leading down. You followed James into a basement room that was smaller than the one upstairs, but somehow more intense. Maybe 24 men sat around tables or stood in small clusters, talking in low voices. Candles flickered on the walls. The air smelled like beer and sweat and something else, something sharp. Danger, maybe. Or just the smell of men planning things they shouldn't be planning. "Welcome to the Dragon's Den," James said with a grin. You recognised some faces. A silversmith from the North End who'd done some work for Master Webb. A printer whose shop you'd walked past 100 times. A doctor still wearing his good coat, and mixed in with them, ordinary working men. Rope makers like you. Coopers and blacksmiths and dock workers. All of them here, in this basement, doing something that felt important even if you didn't understand what yet. A man approached you, older, maybe 40, with a face that looked like it had seen trouble and come out the other side. He had ink stains on his fingers. "James says you were at Oliver's house that night." It wasn't a question. "I was in the street," you said. "I didn't go inside." "But you were there." "Yes." He studied you for a long moment. Then he stuck out his hand. "Name's Eades, Benjamin Eades. I print the Gazette." You shook his hand. His grip was firm, his palm rough with calluses. "The Gazette's been writing about the Stamp Act," you said. Stupid thing to say. Everyone knew the Gazette had been writing about the Stamp Act. But Eades just smiled. "We've been writing about a lot of things, and we're going to keep writing. The question is, are men like you going to keep reading, keep showing up, keep making sure the Crown knows we won't be pushed around?" You didn't know how to answer that. A month ago you were just a rope maker. Now you were standing in a basement with men who were talking about pushing back against the most powerful empire in the world. "I'll show up," you heard yourself say. Eades nodded like that was the answer he expected. "Good man. James, get him something to drink." That first night you mostly listened, sat in a corner with a mug of ale and watched and absorbed. The conversations flowed around you, full of names and plans and grievances you didn't fully understand. Someone mentioned Samuel Adams, and heads nodded with respect. Someone else talked about letters being sent to the other colonies, to New York and Philadelphia and Virginia, about coordinating resistance. Someone used the phrase "Sons of Liberty," and a ripple went through the room, men sitting up straighter, eyes brighter. You didn't speak up. What would you say? You were 18 years old. You made rope. These men were printers and merchants and doctors, men with education and money and connections. What did you have to offer? But James caught your eye across the room and gave you a small nod, and somehow that was enough. You belonged here. You didn't know why yet, but you belonged. The months that followed were strange ones. On the surface, nothing changed. You still woke up before dawn, still walked to the rope walk, still twisted hemp until your arms ached. Master Webb still barked orders. William still snored. The harbour still stank of fish and tar. But underneath, everything was different. 2 or 3 nights a week, you'd slip out of the boarding house after dark and make your way to the Green Dragon. Sometimes the basement was crowded, sometimes just a handful of men. You learned to recognize faces, to remember names. You learned the rhythms of resistance, the way information flowed from one trusted source to another, the careful dance of who knew what and who could be told. You learned that the Sons of Liberty weren't just one group. They were everywhere, in every colony. Farmers and lawyers and shopkeepers and sailors, all of them angry about the same things, all of them pushing back against a government that treated them like children to be managed rather than citizens to be respected. And you learned that you weren't useless after all. Rope makers heard things. Sailors talked on the docks, unguarded, assuming nobody was listening. Information about troop movements, about ships arriving from England, about what the customs officials were planning. You had ears and you had access and you had a reason to be places where interesting conversations happened. So you started listening, really listening, and reporting back what you heard. It wasn't much, a snippet here, a rumour there. But Edie's took every piece of information seriously, writing it down in a little leather book he kept in his coat pocket. You never know what's going to matter, he told you once. The thing that seems like nothing today might be the key to everything tomorrow. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled up in the streets, and the harbour froze solid enough to walk on. Work at the rope walk slowed to a crawl. Ships couldn't sail, which meant ships didn't need rope, which meant you spent long days with nothing to do but stay warm and wait. The cold was brutal, not like any winter you remembered. The boarding house felt like an icebox, and even with all 3 of you huddled around the tiny fireplace, your breath still fogged in the air. Mistress Hutchins rationed the firewood, said it was expensive this year, said everyone would have to make do. You wore your coat to bed, your stockings too. Still woke up shivering most mornings. Here's a fun thing about colonial winters. If you're poor and you don't have enough firewood, you might actually freeze to death in your own home. Happens all the time. Old folks mostly. Babies. Anyone too weak to keep the fire going. The wealthy hire servants to tend their fires around the clock. You wake up at 3 a.m. with ice on the inside of the windows and pray the embers haven't gone completely cold. Food got scarce when the harbour froze. No ships coming in meant no fresh supplies, and the prices at the market climbed until a loaf of bread cost twice what it had in autumn. You learned to make do with less. A bowl of thin porridge in the morning, maybe some salt pork at midday if you were lucky. Your belt got tighter, so did everyone else's, but you didn't complain. Nobody complained. Compared to what some folks had, you were doing fine. At least you had a roof. At least you had work waiting when the thaw came. Some people had nothing at all. You spent a lot of that winter at the Green Dragon. The basement became almost like a second home. You got to know the regulars. The silversmith, whose name was Paul, had a way of drawing people out, making them feel like their opinions mattered. The doctor, Joseph, always seemed to know things before anyone else, like he had sources nobody could identify. And there was John, a rich merchant's son who dressed like he was going to a ball, even when he was just drinking ale in a basement, but who gave money freely to causes he believed in. They became something like friends. Or maybe not friends exactly. Something else. Brothers in a fight that none of you had asked for, but none of you could walk away from. You learned the rituals of the place, the way men would check over their shoulders before speaking freely, the way certain words were never said aloud, only hinted at, the way everyone knew who the informers might be and adjusted their conversations accordingly. It was like learning a new language, a language of glances and silences and things left unsaid. The tavern upstairs was one world, loud, public, full of sailors and merchants conducting ordinary business. The basement was another, quieter, more careful, a place where men could speak their minds without worrying who might be listening. You learned to move between those worlds. Upstairs for a drink and a laugh after work, downstairs when the real conversations happened. It became second nature after a while, like having two lives that only you knew about. One night in late February, word came through that changed everything. You were in the basement when a man burst through the door, breathless, snow melting in his hair. He'd just come from the docks, he said. A ship had arrived from England with news. The Stamp Act had been repealed. For a moment nobody moved. Then someone let out a whoop, and the room exploded. Men hugging each other, pounding backs, shouting so loud it must have been heard in the street above. Someone produced a bottle of good rum, and it made the rounds, everyone taking a drink, toasting to victory. You found yourself laughing, though you weren't sure why. Your eyes were wet. So were other men's eyes, though nobody mentioned it. "We did it," James said, grabbing your shoulders. "We actually did it." Had you done it? You weren't sure. You'd made rope and listened at the docks and sat in a basement drinking ale while other men made plans. But maybe that was enough. Maybe that was what resistance looked like. Not just the big gestures, the mobs and the riots and the effigies swinging from trees, but the small things too. The showing up, the refusing to go along quietly, the being part of something bigger than yourself. The celebration went on until dawn. By the time you stumbled back to the boarding house, the sun was coming up over the harbour, painting the snow pink and gold. Your head throbbed, your legs felt like they might give out. But you were smiling. It was over. The Stamp Act was dead. Boston had won. Except it wasn't over. Not really. You learned that soon enough. The repeal came with strings attached. Parliament passed something called the Declaratory Act, which basically said that even though they were backing down on stamps, they still had the right to tax the colonies whenever they wanted. They were just choosing not to, for now. And the soldiers were still there. That was the thing that got harder to ignore as the months passed and the snow melted and spring turned the harbour from ice to mud. The redcoats hadn't left. If anything, there were more of them, patrolling the streets, watching the docks, standing outside the Green Dragon some nights like they knew exactly what was happening inside. The tension that had exploded in August didn't go away. It just went underground, simmering, waiting. You felt it every day at the rope walk. The workers talked in lower voices now, glanced over their shoulders before saying anything that might be considered dangerous. A man named Patrick got into an argument with a soldier over a card game and ended up with a broken nose. A shop owner on King Street had his windows smashed after someone accused him of being a loyalist. Boston was a city holding its breath, everyone waiting for the next thing to happen, nobody knowing what that thing would be. At the Green Dragon, the conversations grew more serious, less celebration, more planning. What would they do if Parliament passed another tax? What would they do if more soldiers came? What would they do if the Crown decided to make an example of someone? You sat in those meetings and listened and felt something heavy settling in your chest. This wasn't going to end with the Stamp Act. This was just the beginning. And wherever it went, you were part of it now, for better or worse. One night, walking back to the boarding house through streets still damp from a spring rain, you passed the Liberty Tree. It looked different now, quieter. The crowds had moved on, but someone had carved words into the trunk. You stopped to read them in the faint light of a nearby window. Sons of Liberty. 3 words, carved deep into the bark. A mark that would stay there for years, maybe decades, long after the men who carved it were gone. You stood there for a long time looking at those words, thinking about Oliver and his ruined house, about Edie's and his leather notebook, about James and his bright eyes, about all the things that had happened since that March morning when you were just a rope maker's apprentice who didn't know anything about politics or rebellion or what it meant to be part of something bigger than yourself. The city slept around you. 16,000 people, dreaming their separate dreams, not knowing what was coming, not knowing that in a few years these streets would run with blood. But you knew, or at least you suspected, standing there in the rain, looking at words carved into a tree. You understood that this wasn't over. It was just beginning. 2 years passed. Quiet years, mostly. The kind of years that make you think maybe things are settling down, maybe the worst is over, maybe you can go back to just being a rope maker without all the rest of it. You should have known better. By 1767, you're 20 years old, not a boy anymore. Your shoulders have filled out from years of pulling and twisting at the walk. Your hands are scarred and calloused, permanently stained with tar. Master Webb has started giving you more responsibility, letting you supervise the younger apprentices, trusting you with the finer work that requires experience. You're good at this job. Turns out you're good at most things if you do them long enough. James finished his apprenticeship last spring. He's working at a different rope walk now, down near Griffin's Wharf, earning journeyman wages. You still see him at the Green Dragon most weeks, still share a drink and catch up on news, but it's different now. He's got a girl he's courting, a cooper's daughter named Sarah who blushes every time his name comes up. He's thinking about the future, marriage, children, a shop of his own someday. You think about those things too sometimes. Late at night, lying on your mattress, listening to the new apprentice snore in the corner. William's gone too, shipped out on a merchant vessel bound for the West Indies. Said he wanted to see something other than Boston before he got too old. You wonder sometimes if he made it, if he's somewhere warm right now, drinking rum under palm trees while you freeze through another New England winter. But mostly you don't think about the future. There's too much happening in the present. Parliament passed new taxes. Again. They're calling it the Townshend Acts, after the minister who dreamed them up. Taxes on glass, lead, paper, paint, and tea. Everything the colonies need to import from England. The money's supposed to pay for the soldiers stationed here, which feels like a special kind of insult, making us pay for our own occupation. The Green Dragon has been busy. More meetings, more planning, more talk about what to do. The non-importation agreements are back. Merchants pledging not to buy British goods until the taxes are repealed. Lists published in the Gazette naming anyone who breaks the agreement. Crowds gathering outside the shops of men who refuse to sign. It's not as dramatic as the riots back in '65. No effigies swinging from trees, no houses torn apart. But there's a tension now that doesn't let up, a low hum of anger that runs through everything, every conversation, every transaction, every sideways glance between colonists and soldiers on the street. And there are more soldiers now. A lot more. They started arriving in October of 68, ship after ship sailing into the harbour, unloading regiment after regiment, the 14th, the 29th, artillery units with their cannons. By the time they stopped coming, there were nearly 4,000 troops in a town of 16,000 people. One soldier for every 4 civilians. Think about that for a second. One armed soldier for every 4 people. In your neighbourhood, on your street, outside your church. Imagine going to get groceries and passing a guy with a musket every 30 feet. That's Boston now. They set up camp on Boston Common. Tents first, then wooden barracks when it became clear they weren't leaving anytime soon. The Common, which used to be where children played and cattle grazed and people took walks on pleasant evenings, turned into a military camp. Drums at dawn, drill formations all morning, soldiers everywhere you looked, their red coats bright as blood against the green grass. And here's the part that really gets people angry. The soldiers are bored. There's nothing for them to do. They're young men, far from home, with no wars to fight and no enemies to kill. So they drink, they fight, they harass women, they steal from shops and claim they forgot to pay. They're paid almost nothing by the Crown, so they look for side jobs, undercutting local workers. They're miserable, we're miserable, and everyone's just waiting for something to explode. You walked past it one morning on your way to work. Couldn't help yourself, just wanted to see. The scale of it hit you like a fist, rows and rows of white tents stretching across the grass, cannons positioned at the corners, their barrels pointing outward toward the town, soldiers marching in formation, their boots stamping the earth in perfect unison, while a sergeant barked commands. The smoke from cooking fires drifting across the field, mixing with the morning fog rolling in from the harbour. A few other townspeople had stopped to watch. An old woman with a basket of bread. A boy, maybe 10 years old, staring at the soldiers with something between fear and fascination. A man in a merchant's coat, his face tight with an emotion you couldn't read. Nobody spoke. What was there to say? Behind the camp, the province house rose against the sky. That was where the royal governor lived, the man appointed by the king to keep Massachusetts in line. His windows overlook the common, so he could watch his soldiers drill from the comfort of his breakfast table. You wondered what he thought when he looked out at all those red coats. Pride, probably. Satisfaction. The feeling of a man